My name is Claire, and if you had met me a few years ago, you probably wouldn't have remembered me. I was the kind of person who blended into the background, the one sitting quietly at the end of the dinner table while everyone else fought for attention. In my family, that made me the easiest target. I grew up in the house where appearances mattered more than love. My mother, Diane, cared about what the neighbors thought more than what her children actually felt. My father, Richard, stayed silent through everything, never once defending me. He was the kind of man who believed avoiding conflict was better than standing up for the truth. And then there were my siblings. Melissa, my older sister, was the golden child. She married Greg, a man with money and connections, and she never missed a chance to flaunt it. New cars, expensive handbags, vacations. She paraded them like trophies. My parents worshipped her for it. Then there was Ethan, my brother. Spoiled, lazy, and somehow still the apple of my mother's eye. He never held a steady job, but she always found excuses for him. And me? I was the disappointment. The youngest, unmarried, still chasing dreams they thought were ridiculous. Whenever I spoke about wanting to start my own business, they laughed like I told a joke. Claire, you should be realistic. Not everyone is cut out for success, my mother would sneer. I remember one dinner in particular, the night that changed everything. We were all gathered at Melissa's house, sitting around her long dining table that she loved to brag about. She always made sure to tell us how much it cost, like we were all supposed to be impressed. Melissa smirked across the table at me. So Claire, still working at that coffee shop? Her tone dripped with fake sympathy. Before I could answer, Ethan laughed. Hey, at least she gets free muffins, right? That's gotta be a perk. Even my mother joined in. You're wasting your time, Claire. You're not 21 anymore. At this rate, you'll be alone forever, broke and forgotten. I felt my face burn, my throat tighten. I wanted to defend myself, but every time I had tried in the past, it only gave them more ammunition. So instead, I stayed quiet, staring down at my plate, pretending their words didn't stab straight into me. But then Melissa leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Honestly, Claire, it's embarrassing. You're almost 30. Don't you think it's time to grow up and stop playing at life? That was it. Something inside me snapped. I put down my fork and looked at all of them, my family, the people who were supposed to love me. You know what? I said, my voice shaking but strong. You've made it clear how little you think of me. So maybe it's time I stop trying to prove myself to you. I'm leaving. They burst out laughing. Not nervous laughter, not surprised laughter. Real, cruel laughter. Leaving? Ethan mocked. To where? Your little shoebox apartment? Good luck paying rent with coffee tips. Melissa covered her mouth, pretending to stifle her giggles. You'll be back, Claire. Don't be so dramatic. And my mother, with that cold, sharp voice I'll never forget, said, You'll come crawling back when the real world chews you up. Don't think for a second you can survive without us. I stood, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw every insult back in their faces. But instead, I took a deep breath, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. They laughed as I left. Their voices followed me down the driveway, echoing in my ears. What they didn't know was that I'd rather starve alone than be fed by their cruelty. But I didn't realize that was just the beginning of the nightmare. I didn't take much with me that night. Just my old beat-up car, a suitcase with a few clothes, and a laptop that barely worked. As I drove away from Melissa's perfect little neighborhood, my hand shook on the steering wheel. I didn't know if I was running toward something or just running away. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. I ended up in the city in a one-bedroom apartment that was more like a box than a home. The walls were thin, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the neighbors argued so loudly I sometimes pressed my pillow over my head to block them out. The rent ate up most of my paycheck, but at least it was mine. At least no one there laughed when I came through the door. To survive, I worked 2 jobs. Mornings at a coffee shop, nights waiting tables at a small diner. I came home smelling of grease and burnt coffee, my feet aching so badly I sometimes cried myself to sleep. And yet, in a strange way, I felt freer than I ever had before. No one was hovering over me, no one was reminding me that I wasn't good enough. But freedom came with loneliness. Some nights, I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at the wall, wondering if my mother had been right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for success. Maybe I was destined to scrape by, paycheck to paycheck, forever. And then one night after my shift, I opened my laptop and stumbled across a video of a young woman talking about how she built her online business from scratch. She wasn't older, richer, or smarter than me. She was just determined. Something in me lit up. I remembered all the ideas I used to scribble in notebooks, product sketches, website layouts, plans I'd been too scared to share because my family mocked me. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could still try. I started small, researching until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, reading everything I could about e-commerce, digital marketing, and startups. My body was exhausted, but my mind felt alive again. Still, I didn't tell my family. When my mother called, it was only to remind me of what a disappointment I was. "Melissa just got back from Europe. And you, still brewing lattes?" she said once, her voice sharp with mockery. I bit my tongue, forcing a polite answer. "Yeah, Mom, still brewing lattes." I hung up before she could hear my tremble in my voice. The truth was, I had nothing to show yet. Just late-night notes, a growing list of mistakes, and a dream that felt too fragile to share. But deep down, I made myself a promise. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crawl back. If I failed, I'd fail quietly. But if I succeeded, the whole world would hear about it. What I didn't know then was that my quiet little dream was about to consume every part of my life, and it would come at a cost I never saw coming. My mornings were still filled with the hiss of the espresso machine and the clatter of mugs, but my nights belonged to something else entirely. After I dragged myself home from the diner, I'd sit at my tiny kitchen table with my laptop and a notebook, sketching ideas for my business. At first, it felt impossible. Every article I read seemed to contradict the last. Some said dropshipping was the way to go. Others swore by digital products. I tried, failed, started again. My first attempt, a tiny online store selling handmade jewelry, was a disaster. I spent more on supplies than I ever made in sales. I remember crying one night when I realized I had 20 unsold necklaces sitting in a box under my bed. My head dropped into my hands and I whispered, maybe Mom was right. But the next morning, I forced myself to get up and try again. Because if I quit, then they would win. One day at the coffee shop, a customer overheard me talking to a coworker about my failed jewelry store. He was an older man, dressed simply, but there was something sharp in his eyes. After I handed him his coffee, he said, "You know, failing at your first idea doesn't mean you're not cut out for business. It means you're learning." I blinked at him. "Easy for you to say." He chuckled. "I lost everything twice before I found the right idea. Now I run 3 companies. Failure isn't the end. It's the tuition you pay for success." His words stuck with me. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of my mistakes.
So I went back to the drawing board. I started researching markets instead of just guessing what might sell. I read forums, watched tutorials, studied what people actually wanted. Slowly, I built a new plan. But my family, of course, didn't see any of this. When my sister Melissa called, it was only to brag. Greg just bought me a new SUV, leather seats, top of the line. What about you, Claire? Still bussing tables? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, still bussing tables. She laughed. Well, at least you're consistent. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. But instead of breaking down, I opened my laptop and got back to work. Because what they didn't know was that beneath all the ridicule, all the failures, something was starting to form. They thought they had broken me, but they had no idea what I was building. It started with a single sale. I remember the exact moment. I was on a short break at the diner, sitting on an upturned milk crate by the back door when my phone buzzed. You've made a sale. My heart stopped. It was only $20, but it felt like a fortune. Someone out there, a stranger, believed in what I was selling. That tiny notification was the spark I needed. From there, I poured every ounce of myself into the business. Every tip I made at the diner went into inventory. Every spare hour went into designing, testing, marketing. My body ached. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. But I didn't care. For once, my exhaustion meant something. At first, it was slow. A sale here, another there. Weeks went by where nothing happened. But then, word started to spread. A blogger wrote a glowing review of one of my products. My little store got shared on social media. Orders trickled in, then doubled, then tripled. The first time I hit $1,000 in a single week, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by packages I was preparing to ship. And I cried. Not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't a failure. But of course, my family didn't know. To them, I was still the girl pouring lattes and cleaning tables. One evening, my mom called. Her voice was sharp, as usual. Claire, your cousin just got promoted at her firm. She's making 6 figures already. And you? What are you doing with your life? I stared at the shipping labels scattered across my floor, hundreds of orders waiting to go out. My lips curled into a smile, but I kept my voice flat. Still working at the diner, Mom. She sighed, disappointed. I don't know why you waste your time. You'll never get anywhere like this. When I hung up, I laughed to myself. If only she knew. The numbers in my bank account were telling a very different story, and those numbers were climbing faster than I could have ever imagined. But with every success came a new challenge, and I had no idea the storm that was about to hit. Within a year, I had tripled my income. I moved out of that dingy little apartment and into a modest but clean 2-bedroom place. Nothing extravagant, but compared to where I had started, it felt like a palace. I bought furniture that wasn't secondhand, painted the walls my favorite colors, and for the first time in my life, I woke up every morning excited about what I was building. Orders were flooding in. I was pulling late nights, but now it was because I was expanding, not because I was desperate to keep the lights on. My little online business had become something real. But the funny thing about success is that people can sense it, even if you don't say a word. Old friends who had stopped returning my calls suddenly reached out, curious about what I was up to. Coworkers who once snickered behind my back when I left the diner now wanted to know my secret. I smiled politely, but kept my cards close. My family, however, was different. They still thought I was barely scraping by. My mom called once and said, Claire, you can't keep living like this. Why don't you just come home? Melissa can probably help you get a job in Greg's company, something respectable. I clenched my jaw. Respectable? As if the life I was building wasn't? As if the only measure of worth was being under Melissa's shadow. And Melissa herself, ugh, she was relentless. "Greg and I are going to Cabo next week," she bragged on the phone. "You should come, but, well, I don't think you could afford it." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, probably not." The truth is, I could have booked the fanciest suite at the resort without blinking. But I stayed quiet. I wanted them to keep underestimating me. I wanted them to believe I was still that same girl they mocked, the one they pushed out of the house. Because the longer they believed it, the sweeter the reveal would be. Still, a part of me ached. No matter how many orders I shipped, no matter how much money I made, their voices lingered in the back of my mind. I caught myself wondering if I'd ever be enough in their eyes. But then I'd remind myself, I wasn't building this for them anymore. I was building this for me. And yet, just as things were finally falling into place, I received a call that would drag me right back into their world and test just how much I'd really grown. I thought I could keep my success hidden from them, keep living my life quietly while they wallowed in their assumptions. I was wrong. It started with Melissa. One afternoon, out of the blue, she called me. "Claire," she said, her voice sugary sweet, I heard you're doing really well. That's amazing." I narrowed my eyes. "Thanks," I said cautiously. "Really glad to hear you're happy for me." She laughed, that high-pitched fake laugh I'd always hated. "Of course. I mean, it must be so hard doing all this on your own. I just wanted to see if maybe I could help. Maybe we could collaborate, family support." Collaboration? That's what they called it when they wanted something from you. I didn't fall for it. I stayed polite, said I was busy, and hung up. Then came Greg, Melissa's husband. I should have expected him too. He started texting me on a social app, all casual at first. "Hey Claire, I saw your new store online. Impressive." I responded politely, but kept my guard up. He pushed. A little flirt here, a compliment there. Innocent, he claimed. Just admiration for the girl who finally made something of herself. I froze. Greg had always looked at me strangely at family events, a lingering glance that made me uncomfortable. I realized now he wasn't looking at me because he cared, he was calculating. And then there was my mother. Diane's guilt trips escalated. Letters, calls, even one of those long emails that starts with, "Claire, I know I've been hard on you," the kind designed to make you feel like the worst person in the world if you don't come running back. I read them, one by one, but instead of panicking like I used to, I laughed quietly to myself. They had no idea I was no longer the girl who would crumble under their cruelty. I was stronger. I was building my empire in silence, and now I could play along just long enough for the payoff. It was all a game. They thought they were winning. They didn't even see the storm brewing just under the surface. My patience, my planning, my revenge waiting for the perfect moment. And I knew deep down that when the time came, I would make sure every single one of them realized how wrong they were about me. But the betrayal didn't end there. One night I opened my email and found a message from my father. He wrote, "Claire, I'm worried about you. We just want you back home. You're all alone out there." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to scream at him, tell him everything I thought of him and Mom. But instead, I typed back one word, no. It was the first time I said no to them, truly, firmly, and it felt liberating. Little did I know, my family's attempts to pull me back in were just the beginning of the pressure that would test my resolve and set the stage for my ultimate revenge. Everything changed the day my business finally took off in a way I hadn't dared to imagine. I had been working around the clock for months, sleepless nights, skipped meals, endless experimentation, and then it happened. A popular influencer featured one of my products in a post. Overnight, my little store went from a few sales a day to hundreds. My inbox flooded with orders, my bank account numbers climbed faster than I could comprehend, and for the first time in my life, I felt unstoppable. I sat in my apartment, staring at the screen, tears running down my face. All the late nights, all the ridicule, all the times I wanted to give up, it had led me here. I whispered to myself, I did it. I actually did it. But while I was celebrating, my family was facing their own reality. I started hearing things through the grapevine. Melissa's lavish lifestyle wasn't as untouchable as she made it seem. Ethan had blown through the money my parents had given him, leaving them frustrated. My mom, who always prided herself on having everything under control, was now anxious and snapping at every little thing. And the truth was, they had no idea I had quietly become the one with the power. I could feel it building inside me, the satisfaction of knowing that the tables would turn. A few weeks later, I got a call from Ethan. Claire, I need some help, just a little loan, he said, his voice sheepish. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You're calling me? Yes, I didn't know who else to ask, he admitted. I hung up without a word. It was intoxicating, the sense of control I finally had over them. Every mocking remark they had ever made, every glance of contempt, had prepared me for this moment. And yet, as much as I was enjoying my quiet revenge, a small part of me hesitated. Was I crossing a line? Was this what I had worked for, to watch them suffer? I reminded myself, I hadn't built this for revenge alone. I had built it for me. But seeing them struggle while I thrived, it was a side effect I couldn't ignore. And then came the message that truly shocked me. Melissa had reached out again, this time with an offer that reeked of desperation. She claimed she wanted to celebrate my success, but I could sense the undercurrent of greed. I read her email twice, then 3 times, feeling a mixture of anger and amusement. They thought they could manipulate me, that I would fall back into the patterns of my old self. They didn't know. I had changed. I had survived, and I was ready, because the next move, the move that would make them realize just how wrong they were about me, was about to be made. I knew it was coming. The moment when the people who had laughed at me, belittled me, and pushed me out would finally feel the weight of their own desperation. It started with Ethan. One morning my phone rang, and when I saw his name, I felt a twinge of amusement instead of dread. Claire, please, he said, his voice almost cracking. I need some help, just a little money. I promise I'll pay you back. I listened quietly, letting him stumble over his words, the same brother who had once mocked me for my pathetic little life. I can't, Ethan, I said calmly. I'm not your bank. You should have learned to manage your own life. There was a long pause on the line, then a tiny, almost pitiful, please? I hung up. Next came my mother. Her letters and emails became relentless, each one dripping with guilt and pleas. Claire, we just want you back. Don't let pride keep you from your family, she wrote in one message, her words practically begging for my forgiveness. I smiled as I read it. She had spent decades controlling me with criticism, yet now she was reduced to pleading. And then Melissa. She invited me to her home for a family lunch, all innocence and charm. But I knew better. I could see through the fake concern. She wanted something, money, favors, or perhaps to humiliate me again. I accepted the invitation, not because I wanted to see them, but because I was ready to watch the moment when their facade would crack. The day I arrived, I stepped out of my car and felt a thrill course through me. Designer shoes, tailored coat, luxury bag, all visible proof of the life they had mocked me for. I smiled politely at the doorman and the neighbors who whispered behind their hands. Inside, Melissa and Greg greeted me with fake warmth. Claire, "Look at you! You look incredible," Melissa gushed. I let them bask in the illusion that I was just visiting, playing the part of the successful but humble relative. All the while, I could see their eyes darting, calculating. They wanted something from me, and I had no intention of giving it to them. For the first time in my life, I wasn't desperate for their approval. I wasn't the little girl they had dismissed. I was in control, and what they didn't know, what they would never forget, was that I had been planning this moment for years. When I left that house that evening, I felt something I had never felt before: power. And I knew, without a doubt, that the final act of this story, the one that would humiliate them completely, was closer than ever. The day I returned to my hometown, I did it on my terms. Not as the scared, belittled girl they had pushed out, but as a woman who had built her life from nothing and was finally unshakable. I drove up the familiar streets, the houses unchanged, the neighbors peeking through their curtains as if expecting me to fail. But this time, I wasn't failing. I was a millionaire. I didn't need their approval, their pity, or their laughter. Melissa's house came into view, the same house where I had been humiliated that night years ago. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, but my heart raced with excitement, not fear. I was going back, but not as the girl who had left. I was going back as the one who held the power. When I stepped out of my car, they all saw me at once. Melissa froze, her smile faltering. Greg's jaw tightened, Ethan's face went pale. Even my parents, Diane and Richard, looked shocked. The kind of shock that comes when someone realizes they underestimated you.
They didn't know what to say next. They had spent years mocking me, imagining I would never succeed, believing I would come crawling back. And now here I was, standing in front of them. Everything they had laughed at transformed into proof of my triumph. The dinner that evening was tense. They tried to mask their jealousy with forced congratulations and hollow questions. "Claire, your business, it's impressive," Melissa said, but the envy was dripping from her words. Greg made a casual comment, hoping to charm me, but I ignored him. I didn't need to prove anything to him. And Ethan, poor Ethan, kept fumbling with his words, trying to hide how small he felt next to me now. The same brother who had once made me feel worthless now shrank in my presence. As the evening went on, I realized something. I hadn't come back for approval. I hadn't come back to be welcomed. I had come back for something far more satisfying. I had come back for revenge. Because the years of humiliation, the constant doubt, the endless ridicule, they deserved a reckoning. And I intended to give it to them. Little did they know the storm I had been quietly building all these years was about to hit. And it would change everything. The first thing I did was sit back and watch. I let them make the first mistakes, the first missteps, and I savored every second. The same people who had once made me feel small were now scrambling in my presence, unsure of how to act, unsure of how to reclaim control. Melissa tried to flaunt her lifestyle, posting pictures on social media, bragging about trips and purchases, but I knew her little empire wasn't as solid as she made it seem. Behind the filtered photos and the designer labels, there were debts, late payments, and tension with Greg. I didn't have to confront her yet, just letting her squirm was enough, but I started dropping subtle hints, stories of my success, just enough for her to realize that I had surpassed her. I mentioned casually, "Oh, we shipped over 1,000 orders today. Can you believe it?" Her jaw tightened every time I said it. And Greg, the man who had once tried to flirt with me and make me feel uncomfortable in my own family, now found himself sitting in silence as I smiled politely, completely untouchable. Then came Ethan. My lazy, entitled brother called again, begging for help. This time it was desperate, bordering on humiliating. "Claire, please, I need just a small loan. I promise I'll pay you back." I remembered all the times he had mocked me, all the times he had laughed at my dreams. I could have given him the money, could have bailed him out as I had once wished I could, but I didn't. "No, Ethan," I said, my voice calm and firm. "I don't bail out people who laughed at my failures." The silence on the other end was deafening, and it felt incredible. Finally, I turned my attention to my parents. Diane and Richard had spent years manipulating me with guilt, their passive-aggressive jabs, and their constant reminders of my place in the family. I confronted them calmly, looking them square in the eyes. "I've lived my life on my terms for years now. I've built something you refused to believe I could. And while I don't owe you anything, I want you to understand this. Your opinions, your ridicule, it doesn't matter anymore." My mother's face went pale. My father's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time, they were speechless. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just successful, I was untouchable. I had taken the one thing they used to control me, the one thing they thought defined me, and I had turned it into my weapon. The family who once laughed at my dreams, who thought I'd fail, who believed I would return broken and defeated, they couldn't laugh anymore. I had the last word, I had the power. And for the first time, I didn't just feel relief, I felt justice. But as I sat in my car that night, watching the house behind me, I realized something important. Revenge had been sweet, but freedom was even sweeter. After that night, I stepped away from them, from the whispers, the fake smiles, the manipulation. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had proved it to myself long before they saw it. I continued to grow my business, expanding into new markets, hiring a small team, and finally living a life I could be proud of. I traveled, explored hobbies I had long abandoned, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, not because of what I could give them, but because they valued me for who I was. I stopped checking my mother's emails, ignored Melissa's social media posts, and never answered Ethan's calls. They had their lives and I had mine. The bitterness they carried toward me was theirs to bear. I carried only lessons. And yet, sometimes I would think back to that first night I left home. The humiliation, the laughter, the cruelty, it had been unbearable. But it had also been the catalyst. Without it, I might have stayed invisible forever. Without it, I might have never discovered the fire inside me. I don't tell this story to boast. I tell it to remind anyone who feels small, overlooked, or dismissed that you are stronger than you think. The world may try to convince you you don't matter, but your life is yours to build, your dreams yours to chase. And when you rise, quietly, deliberately, there is no sweeter satisfaction than knowing the ones who doubted you can no longer touch your happiness. They laughed when I left, but when I came back a millionaire, I laughed last. And this time, it wasn't at them. It was at the strength I had found in myself.